Time now for the markets with Artis. And Artis, you say that the red meat market continues to have some trouble.
Yes, it does, Amy, and there seems to be little good news there. As we look at the rest of the markets, old crop soybeans haven't topped out yet, but new crop is waiting its turn. Beef prices remain mired while pork supplies seem to be plentiful everywhere. And the cold storage numbers show more pork and poultry than the trade expected. Well, live cattle contracts at the Chicago Mercantile settled lower, as did feeder cattle at midweek. Losses in the feeder cattle contracts, strong corn gains, and the inability to push beef prices higher caused the live contracts to drop. The deferred feeder cattle contracts were pressured the most as traders focused on the rally in the grain markets. Now, Sue Martin says that the cattle market is having trouble recovering because of large supplies of competing meats.
Normally, June is seen as a soft month, and our demand seems to be percolating pretty good finally now that we're entering into a grilling season. It's been very late this year, and that's been part of our problem. The other part of our problem is that we continue to have to compete with the consumer's tax or disposable income against beef versus pork and poultry. And we have a good supply, increased supply of pork this year, and an increased supply of poultry, and therefore the cattle markets really had to struggle.
The latest cold storage report shows supplies of red meat and poultry were up at the end of April. The pork and chicken numbers topped pre-report estimates. Pork in cold storage totaled 699 million pounds, up 8% on the month and 6% on the year. That's a new record for the end of April and bigger than pre-report estimates. The increase is said to be due to poor pork exports, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. Beef in cold storage totaled 510 million pounds, slightly lower than the previous month and down 2% from last year. Pre-report estimates expected supplies to be unchanged. The total amount of red meat in cold storage was pegged at 1.2 billion pounds, an increase of 5% on the month and 3% on the year. Chicken in cold storage stood at 669 million pounds, 8% more than last month and 11% larger than last year, and once again above the pre-report average estimate. Well, as illustrated in the cold storage report, the news in the hog market remains negative. Even the bird flu scare in China is not helping pork exports. China apparently has an oversupply of its own pork that it's trying to manage, so it's not importing any pork. Sue Martin says that Europe is also not a receptive market.
Europe was thought to be, in the last half of this year, to be lower in production, and yet the USDA came out and showed world supplies for this year to be higher than what we were thinking. Now, this is kind of interesting because not only has U.S. markets been high the past year for corn and feed, but so has Europe and other parts of the world, and yet the producer didn't cut back his production. He stayed in there and even increased a little bit. Abnormal, very abnormal. And so this speaks to us that the prices are still going to wane here and probably move lower. We're about seasonally ready to peak, I think.
Well, our trivia question today is designed to illustrate the concentration that is taking place in the nation's swine industry. It has to do with the number of sows owned by the leading pork producers in the United States. How much of the nation's sow herd is owned by the nation's top 3 pork producers? Is the answer 19%, 28%, 35%, or 48%? We'll have the answer between the markets and the feature story. Soybeans were higher at midweek on commercial and technical selling. Brownfield says old crop supplies remain tight and China continues to be in the market for beans. Farmer selling has allowed an increase and has allowed the new crop to outgain old crop. Market analyst Sue Martin says she thinks that it could be June or July before old crop beans peak. She's not selling any new crop at this time.
Our sales are still percolating along, and when I look at beans, I think that I'm still on deck for looking at June, possibly early July, but we want to be watching real closely because they're already starting to roll from July into November. The November contract, I don't think I'd sell that with wooden nickels just yet.
All right.
I'm very friendly, the new crop contract.
Well, that's it for the market segment today. Time now for the trivia quiz for this week. It concerned what portion of the nation's sow herd is owned by Smithfield Foods, Triumph Foods, and Seaboard Foods. Well, the nation's top 3 pork producers, the answer is 48%, according to Successful Farming magazine. The nation's sow herd totaled just over 3 million head last year. The top 3 companies owned 1.46 million of those. Smithfield by itself owned 28% of the nation's sow herd.